My name is Angel. I was only 9 years old when my whole world changed forever. I used to have a happy life, a life filled with love, laughter, and the warmth of my parents. My dad called me his little sunshine, and my mom made the most delicious meals every day. But one fateful day, all of that was taken away from me in the blink of an eye. I remember it clearly. Mom and Dad were going on a trip. They said it was for business, but they promised to be back in 2 days. I stood at the door, waving as their car drove off. "Be good, Angel. We'll bring you something special," Dad said with his usual big smile. But they never came back. A few hours later, a strange man came to our house with tears in his eyes. "There's been an accident," he said. At the funeral, I sat quietly as the adults whispered around me. I didn't fully understand what was happening. All I knew was that my parents were gone, and I would never see them again. After the burial, my family members started discussing where I would live. They spoke like I wasn't even there. Uncle Mike, my mom's younger brother, wanted to take me in. But Aunt Evelyn, my dad's elder sister, insisted I should stay with her. "She's my brother's child. It's only right," Aunt Evelyn said with a fake smile. I didn't know it at the time, but that decision would change my life in ways I could never imagine. When I arrived at Aunt Evelyn's house, I thought things would be okay. It was a big house with shiny tiles and expensive curtains. Her 2 children, Joshua and Ruth, looked like they had everything anyone could want. I thought I would find love here. But that first night, Aunt Evelyn gave me a mat to sleep on the floor in the kitchen. "This is not your father's house. Don't get too comfortable," she said coldly. Her words stung, but I didn't cry. My parents had taught me to be strong. The next morning, I woke up to Aunt Evelyn banging on the door. "Get up. There's work to do," she barked. She handed me a broom and pointed around the house. "Sweep everything. And don't miss a spot." I cleaned the entire house while Ruth and Joshua watched cartoons and ate breakfast. I was so hungry, but when I asked for food, Aunt Evelyn shoved a piece of dry bread into my hand. "That's enough for you," she said. Later that day, she handed me a tray filled with sachets of water. "Take this to the streets and sell. Don't come back until you've sold everything," she ordered. I had never done anything like that before. The streets were noisy and chaotic, and I was scared. But I didn't have a choice. Selling water became my daily routine. While Ruth and Joshua went to their fancy school, I spent my days walking under the hot sun, weaving between cars and calling out, "Pure water. Cold pure water." I hated it, but what could I do? Aunt Evelyn didn't care about me. She only cared about the money I brought back at the end of the day. One day, I overheard her talking to a neighbor. My brother was useless. When I needed him the most, he refused to help me. "And now I'm stuck with his child," she said bitterly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My dad had always spoken kindly of Aunt Evelyn. He had even sent her money several times. But it was never enough for her. As time went on, Aunt Evelyn's hatred for me grew. She started beating me for the smallest mistakes. If I didn't sell all the water or if I came back late, she would slap me or hit me with a stick. I had bruises on my arms and legs, but I hid them. I didn't want anyone to know. Ruth and Joshua were no better. They laughed at me and called me names. "Street girl." Joshua would sneer. I wanted to scream, but I stayed silent. My parents had taught me to always respect my elders, even when they didn't deserve it. One evening, it started to rain while I was still selling water. I was drenched and shivering by the time I got home. Aunt Evelyn took one look at me and yelled, "You're so useless. You couldn't even sell everything." Before I could explain, she slapped me across the face. I fell to the floor, tears streaming down my cheeks. I cried myself to sleep that night, wondering why my life had turned out this way. The next day, something happened that changed everything. I was walking through the market, feeling weak and dizzy. I hadn't eaten properly in days, and the sun was blazing. My legs gave out, and I fell to the ground, scattering the sachets of water. People walked past me, not even stopping to help. I felt like I was invisible. Then I heard a voice. Angel, is that you? I looked up and saw Uncle Mike. He knelt beside me, his face filled with concern. What happened to you? He asked, his voice trembling. I couldn't hold back my tears. I told him everything about Aunt Evelyn, the beatings, the hawking, and the hunger. Uncle Mike's expression turned to anger. She did this to you, he said, clenching his fists. Uncle Mike carried me to a nearby clinic. The doctor said I was malnourished and dehydrated. While I rested, Uncle Mike went straight to Aunt Evelyn's house. I don't know what he said to her, but the neighbors told me later that he shouted so loudly, everyone could hear. You're a monster. How could you do this to your own family? He yelled. The police were called, and Aunt Evelyn was arrested for child abuse. I heard she cried and begged, but it didn't matter. She was sentenced to a year in prison. Now, I live with Uncle Mike. He's kind and gentle, just like my parents were. He enrolled me in school, and for the first time in a long time, I feel safe. I still miss my parents every day, but I know they would be proud of me for surviving everything I went through. My journey isn't over, but I'm ready to face whatever comes next.